Welcome back to WCH Crime. This is the third part of our miniseries on the Columbia Eagle mutiny. Where we left off last time, Alan Clyde had successfully hijacked the SS Columbia Eagle, got it to neutral Cambodia, been given asylum and a guarantee by authorities, but their deadly cargo would be held until the end of the war.
It's the case of the successful two-man mutiny aboard the American munitions ship Columbia Eagle.
2 crewmen were armed when they took control of the cargo ship.
The hijackers, meanwhile, went on.
On the 17th of March, the mutineers, along with Captain Swan, were taken off the ship to the naval base at Rayam, near Sihanoukville, and from there they were flown to the capital, Phnom Penh. There, they were taken out to dinner by their Cambodian hosts and put up in an army barracks. So right then, it looked like Alan Clyde had got everything they hoped for. But unbeknownst to them at the time, events in Cambodia were unfolding.
The U.S. had been trying to undermine Sihanouk for many years because they wanted the Cambodian government to step up the resistance against the Khmer Rouge as well as the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese people transporting materials down the Ho Chi Minh Trail. So they had been pushing different members of the government, providing, I imagine, material support and financial support to line their pockets. But the CIA was adamantly moving towards trying to get some of those people on their side, and this was the golden opportunity.
The next day, 18th of March 1970, Alan Clyde were driven to the Foreign Office to meet with officials and fill in some paperwork about what they'd done to process their asylum claims. On the way, Al asked to go by the embassies of North Vietnam and the Viet Cong, which the driver did. Outside the embassies, there were big crowds shouting and yelling, but from the car, they couldn't see what all the commotion was about. That only became clear later.
That night, the coup occurred.
A few days beforehand, Cambodian Prime Minister Lon Nol had given an ultimatum to North Vietnam for all of their and Viet Cong forces to withdraw from Cambodian soil by the 15th of March or face military action. When this didn't happen, anti-Vietnamese protests broke out in Phnom Penh on the 16th, probably organised by figures in the government, and escalated into rioting and attacks on the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong embassies, which Al had witnessed. On the 18th, army officers, Lon Nol, and the pro-business and pro-US Deputy Prime Minister Sirik Matak dispatched troops to key positions in the capital, while the National Assembly held a vote of no confidence in Sihanouk and appointed Lon Nol head of state with emergency powers. In the chaos, Alan Clyde were put in limbo.
The first time they sent us into a military facility, and we were held there.
At first, they were more or less allowed to move about in Cambodia and able to see the coup happen firsthand.
So it was not a bloodless coup. We would see taxis coming in and minibuses coming in, all shot up, blood all over the place, bringing in people that were under arrest. There were people lined up on the ground being beat with their hands behind their back, tied behind their backs. Clyde and I multiple times had gone out and given them water and food and cigarettes and, tried to comfort these people the best we could. And we're told by the Cambodians who didn't know how to deal with us at all that we couldn't do it. After that first night, the second night, we had been told that we were not allowed to interact with these prisoners at all. They actually killed these people. Some of them were murdered and just taken straight over to the river. They had a little dock, and they would just waste them there and dump them into the Mekong River. They didn't even have to shoot them. They could just push them off because they would drown. Their hands were tied. And oftentimes there were multiple people tied together. Many of them bloodied up and just, obviously had been interrogated and beat severely.
One thing which was clear about the new government was that it was going to be more friendly to US foreign policy than the previous one, which didn't bode well for Alan Clyde.
The strangest thing happened. Some mid-level military people came and got us, had us go over to where the flagpole was, which was across from where some of these prisoners were, and had us stand there. And then a column of soldiers came in with rifles. They got down to almost like they were going to shoot us. We thought we were going to be shot then.
That was until they had a small stroke of luck.
And then an officer came, a higher ranking officer, and pulled the adjutants aside and dismissed this squad of soldiers. We were sent back into our room, and then we were moved almost immediately to another facility. They did this several times. We were moved to different facilities. I think it was just the question of whether or not this person or that person thought that they might be able to further their ambitions by keeping, maybe they could get permanent American status, go to the U.S. or something if they kept us alive.
They were moved again, but after their close encounter with a potential firing squad, they were held in conditions that got worse and worse.
We ended up in a prison vessel.
And in that vessel, things began to deteriorate for Al.
About that time, I started having sensory deprivation. We were being isolated. I remember government people coming in and showing me pictures of my wife. You have a baby now. Maybe you ought to do this. Maybe you should do that. And it got to be pretty thick and heavy to the point of where I started to slip away. What happened was I started to have a nervous breakdown. Finally, I just got so fucking fed up, I jumped off the end of the ship and thought I would try my best to swim across the Mekong.
It's unclear what Al would do or where he'd go if he swam across, but he was in no condition to reach the other side.
I didn't make it. I was placed into a cell that had you couldn't stand up in. You could only hunch over into it. It was probably 5 feet tall at most.
They cut his rations. And to make matters worse, only 3 weeks after Clyde and Al were taken prisoner, the new Cambodian government released the Columbia Eagle, its remaining crew, and its napalm cargo back to the US. And while Clyde and Al's conditions became harsher, the rest of the world was talking about what happened aboard the SS Columbia Eagle. And as is pretty standard with protest movements, the media tried to put their own spin on it.
Those two as pot-smoking hippies out to protest the Vietnam War.
Dope that done it.
Clyde McKay Jr. and Alvin Glatowski. About reports that Glatowski had been on drugs.
They assumed that he was on the influence of drugs or dope.
The press wanted to constantly say that we were nothing but pill-popping, drug-induced hippies, and that we had no political brains whatsoever. That is an entire lie. We had an understanding of the politics that were involved. Merchant sailors may be not too well educated in many cases, but when you are transporting weapons, particularly bombs, and you're coming into port, it's only a matter of a few minutes before you learn where these weapons are going to be used.
Something else happened which the pair didn't expect. Conspiracy theories started swirling around them. The unfortunate timing of their arrival in Cambodia, just a matter of hours before a pro-US coup, led to widespread claims that Al and Clyde were actually working on behalf of the CIA, and that they'd hijacked the ship in order to smuggle small arms to the coup plotters. Numerous false claims circulated, like a claim that when the Columbia Eagle left the United States, it was deeper in the water than when it left Cambodia, supposedly showing that weaponry had been taken off. Now, this was disproved by photographic evidence, but even Sihanouk himself, then in exile, started repeating this, as did all of the official press associated with the Soviet Union and its allies, which were then pretty influential, as well as even reputable publications like Le Monde. All this led to Al and Clyde being pretty much abandoned by the anti-war movement.
We lost all support from the left in the United States. The only people that gave us support was clergy and Vietnam Veterans Against War.
Even if Al had succeeded somewhat in getting his political message across, which was at least the case for groups like Vietnam Veterans Against the War, he was paying a terrible price.
I was eventually sent to a facility. I believe it was a hospital for the insane or whatever. Can't imagine I was there more than 2 weeks or so.
While he was there, he was able to self-medicate with an antipsychotic drug, Thorazine, he got hold of, until, as he says, he was able to get a better grip on reality. And as he got better, he was moved into the Palais du Gouvernement, Sihanouk's old residence, under house arrest, although with some limited freedom to go around the city.
I ended up being put back with Clyde. Clyde and I continued to talk about escape together.
And Clyde actually came up with an idea, but in the poor psychological and physical state that Al was in, Clyde told him he thought Al would slow them down.
I agreed with him. I said, yes, you're right. I will slow you down. You don't need me to do this. You need to be gone yourself. And so I helped him make arrangements to do so. We went out to dinner. He was able to escape out the back door, or actually a bathroom. He was able to go into the bathroom and escape.
Clyde, along with another American, a Vietnam War deserter and Marxist called Larry Humphrey, had some outside help to escape.
They got to a certain point and they were dropped off, and then that was it.
Al knew that once they got away, he'd be questioned, so they had a story prepared to throw the Cambodian authorities off Clyde's trail.
He told me I understood that I would be interrogated and they would want to know, and my goal was to tell them that he had headed in a particular direction. That was my instructions, and I did so.
Clyde and Larry planned to join the Khmer Communists, or KC, communist guerrillas at the time allied with North Vietnam, who'd been fighting a war of insurgency in the countryside against the Cambodian state since 1968. Over this time period, Al and Clyde had a lot of contact with international journalists. One day, Al was approached by a US reporter.
And he said, well, what are you going to do? And I said, well, I personally would love to stay here, but I can't. I'm afraid that I will deteriorate again. And I said, what I would really like to do is get back to the United States and face trial and surrender myself. And he asked me what he could do to help. I said, well, what would really help is if you have a car that was sitting right here and we could get in and go. He goes, well, I can't do that, but I can bring one up to the gate at the palace.
Al knew what might face him back in the US. The possibility of life in prison or even the death penalty. But he was worried enough about his psychological health that he needed to try.
They had a gate, and lots of soldiers were camped out there, both in the building and out in the grounds. And we made an arrangement for this to happen at a particular time. He would come by with a car and a driver, and that I would walk over and be talking with him and be right next to the gate, and then he would leave the door open on my side, and we would just bail for it and then go. And that's exactly what happened. He took me straight to the U.S. Embassy, and I surrendered.
Well, that's it for part 3. The relevant levels of our Patreon supporters can listen to the final part now, as well as the bonus audio. So if you don't already, you can support us, get early access to episodes and other benefits at patreon.com/workingclasshistory. For everyone else, the 4th and final part will be out next week.
For Thailand we were bound. The cargo we carried was meant to scorch the ground. 10,000 tons of napalm might bring a victory. The last thing we expected was a mutiny.
If you want to learn more about the Vietnam War, check out the Working Class History podcast series on the conflict. Our episode 8 is about the strike wave which took place in the US at the time. Episodes 10 and 11 are about the anti-war movement within the US Army and Navy. And in episode 14, we talk to Noam Chomsky about the geopolitics of the conflict and hear from a member of the Vietnamese Women's Union about the human cost of the war. Coming soon, we also have a multi-part episode about the US movement against the war, so subscribe today to make sure you don't miss it. Thanks to our patrons for making this podcast possible. This episode was written and produced by WCH and Daniel Woldorff. Audio editing by Daniel Woldorff. Music composed by Austin Coulson. The outro music for this episode is the song Deep Water by the R.J. Phillips Band, which is about the mutiny. Links to stream it in the show notes. Catch you next time.
Save us from the throes of war.